Summer 1944, Normandy. The war in Europe had entered its decisive phase. 2 months after D-Day, the Allied advance across France was pushing the German army toward collapse, but the skies above remained deadly and uncertain. Every day, hundreds of aircraft crisscrossed the low, gray ceiling over Normandy. Bombers, fighters, reconnaissance planes, all part of the vast, unseen machinery of liberation. By August, the Luftwaffe was bleeding to death, but not yet gone. Small, desperate fighter groups still lurked in the clouds, striking at Allied bombers before vanishing into the haze. For the young men of the 8th Air Force, every flight meant risk. Risk of mechanical failure, of anti-aircraft fire, of a flash in the sky that turned a friend into smoke. This was not the glamorous air war of Hollywood posters. It was attrition, hour after hour, fought at 400 miles an hour in machines that shuddered when pushed too hard. George E. Preddy Jr., a North Carolina native with the calm face of a schoolteacher, had become the symbol of a new kind of airman. He wasn't reckless or loud or cruel. He was precise, surgical in the way he flew, and terrifyingly efficient in how he killed. By the summer of 1944, Captain George Preddy had already earned his reputation as an ace among aces. His squadron, the 487th Fighter Squadron of the 352nd Fighter Group, called themselves the Blue-Nosed Bastards of Bodney, named for the distinctive cobalt paint that marked their P-51 Mustangs. The color stood for coolness under fire, and for a quiet confidence that the Mustang, and the men who flew it, could outfight anyone in the sky. Preddy's own aircraft bore the name Cripes a Mighty Third. He'd written it himself, after an old Southern exclamation he'd heard his father use when something went wrong. It was a strange, almost comic name for a killing machine, but that was Preddy. Even in war, he held on to something human. The P-51 Mustang had changed everything. With its long-range drop tanks and powerful Merlin engine, it could escort bombers deep into German airspace, dogfight at 30,000 feet, or dive low over enemy convoys. It was, as one pilot said, the plane that gave us back the sky. But over Normandy, the skies were a trap. German pilots flying Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s had learned to attack from the sun, striking from behind before the Americans could react. Even the best could be caught off guard. One burst of 20mm fire could rip a P-51 apart. Preddy understood this as well as anyone. He'd seen friends vanish in the blink of an eye, flames instead of wings. And yet, every morning, he climbed back into that narrow cockpit, strapped himself to the machine, and took to the air. "You never really get used to it," he once told a ground crewman. "You just learn not to hesitate." By early August, Allied forces were breaking out of Normandy. The Germans, desperate to contain them, were launching air assaults on supply lines and bridges. On the morning of August 6, 1944, radar screens at Allied command lit up. An enemy formation, roughly 30 planes, moving fast from the east. Preddy's unit was scrambled from Bodney Airfield in England. The mission was routine on paper, intercept and destroy. But war has a way of turning routine into legend. Within minutes, 12 Mustangs cut across the channel and into the thick coastal haze. Preddy led the second element, scanning the endless gray for movement. Below, the French countryside was scarred with smoke and shell fire. Above, the clouds glowed faintly gold in the early sun. Then, radio chatter, a shout. "Bandits, 11 o'clock, low!" Preddy banked sharply left. Below them, a cluster of Bf-109s was attacking Allied ground forces near Argentan. The Germans were flying low and fast, darting between clouds and tracer fire, hunting for targets. Preddy dove. For the men who followed him, what happened next seemed impossible. He didn't hesitate. He didn't circle. He dove straight into the swarm. The Mustang screamed downward, its Merlin engine howling. The airframe groaned under the strain. Bullets hissed past. Through his gun sight, Preddy watched a single Messerschmitt cross the reticle and fired. The German fighter exploded in flame. Preddy rolled right, fired again. Another kill, then a third. Within seconds, the sky had become a storm of tracers, arcs of light crossing at lethal speed. His wingman's voice cracked over the radio. Jesus, he's going through them like they're standing still. In less than 10 minutes, 8 enemy planes would fall from that patch of sky. But in this first dive, this first furious minute, George Preddy was no longer just a pilot. He was something else entirely, the still point in a hurricane of fire. The clock read 9:52 a.m. over the rolling fields of Normandy when Captain George Preddy began his descent. By 10:02, the battle was over. Those 10 minutes would enter Air Force legend, an act of audacity that defied logic, doctrine, and the odds of survival. From the moment Preddy's Mustang broke through the clouds, he saw the swarm below him, a mix of silver and gray crosses slashing low across the Bocage country near Argentan. German Bf-109s, perhaps 30 of them, diving to strafe American armor and supply convoys. He didn't wait for orders. He simply rolled inverted and went down, cutting through the haze like a blade. The sky compressed around him, 400 miles an hour, 500. The Mustang shuddered as it dove through its own slipstream. Preddy's hand rested steady on the stick. His right thumb hovered over the trigger, waiting for the smallest flicker of opportunity. Below him, the enemy formation broke apart. He saw one plane pulling up and to the right. A flash of light, the sun off the canopy. He fired. 650 caliber Brownings spat flame, tracing a line of white-hot lead into the Messerschmitt's engine block. The plane disintegrated mid-turn. A flash, then nothing but black smoke and falling wings. Preddy didn't even look back. He was already banking left. To the men watching from above, it looked suicidal. One American against dozens, alone in a knife fight that should have lasted seconds. But to George Preddy, it was geometry. He flew with a mind wired for angles, closure rates, and instinct. Every time he fired, he was already thinking 2 planes ahead. He dived again. Another Bf-109 in the reticle. A burst, 2 seconds, no more. The enemy spun out of control, trailing fire. Preddy pulled up sharply, so close to the wreckage that metal fragments peppered his canopy. "Keep him in sight, Blue Leader," someone shouted over the radio. "He's got half the Luftwaffe down there." But there was no formation anymore, no wingman in position. There was only Preddy and the swarm. At 10:00 a.m., he leveled off at treetop height, chasing a pair of German fighters racing for the east. Their engines clawed at the air, desperate to escape. Preddy closed the distance in seconds. His Mustang's Merlin engine screamed at full throttle, 600 feet per second. The perfect predator. He lined up the first target, fired, and watched the cockpit erupt in orange flame. Without pause, he rolled right and fired again. The second Bf-109 tried to climb, then broke apart under his guns. He exhaled once, slow, steady. 4 down. Another pair appeared head-on. He didn't break away. Instead, he charged straight through, a deadly game of chicken at 400 miles per hour. The German pilot flinched first, yanking his stick left. Preddy fired a short burst and clipped his tail clean off. Now 5, then 6. The sky was littered with smoke trails and burning wrecks. For a moment, even the gunfire stopped. It was as if the air itself was holding its breath. In the cockpit, the world narrowed to the sound of the Merlin's engine, the low, rhythmic vibration beneath his boots, the smell of oil and cordite filling the cabin. He looked around. Only a few German fighters remained, scattering in panic. He'd come down alone, and somehow the enemy was retreating. He climbed again through the haze, fuel running low. Below him, fields burned. Above him, the clouds glowed amber with sun and smoke. "Bodney Control, this is Cripes a Mighty," he radioed calmly. "Scratch 8. There was a long silence on the channel before the voice came back, disbelieving. "Say again, Captain?" 8 confirmed, he replied. 10 minutes work. When he landed, the ground crew thought he was joking. His Mustang was nearly spotless. Not a single bullet hole. He climbed out, face pale, eyes sharp, as if he'd just woken from a trance. Someone handed him a cigarette. He took one drag, exhaled slowly, and said nothing. That afternoon, the official report from the 352nd Fighter Group confirmed it. 8 enemy aircraft destroyed in less than 10 minutes. It was the most concentrated burst of aerial combat success by a single pilot in the European theater. For George Preddy, it was not glory. It was survival. But for the men who saw it, it was something else. Proof that in a war of machines, a single human being could still make the impossible happen. The newspapers would later call it the last stand over Normandy. But to those who flew beside him, it was simply Preddy being Preddy. War has a cruel rhythm. One day you cheat death, the next, it calls in the debt. For George Preddy, the summer of 1944 marked both his triumph and the beginning of his countdown. By late August, the Allies had broken through Normandy. Paris was free, and the German army was retreating across France in disarray. But victory in the air came at a cost. Every mission thinned the ranks. Every empty bunk at Bodny airfield was a quiet reminder that no man stayed lucky forever. Preddy had become a legend, the calm ace who could shoot the wings off a Messerschmitt without breaking a sweat. The newspapers called him the fastest gun in the sky. But those who knew him saw the toll. His hands, once steady, now trembled when he lit a cigarette. The lines around his eyes deepened. He wrote home less often, and when he did, the words were clipped and tired. "Don't believe what they print," he wrote to his brother Bill, also a pilot. "No one wins up there. We just survive longer than the others." His legend followed him from mission to mission. The younger pilots idolized him. They'd crowd around his Mustang before takeoff, hoping to absorb a bit of his luck. He always smiled, offered a quiet word, but he didn't like being called a hero. "Heroes are the ones who didn't come back," he'd mutter. By autumn, the war had shifted east. The Luftwaffe was bleeding out, but desperate. They flew fewer sorties, but their pilots, hardened, cornered, were lethal. The weather was colder now. Low clouds, poor visibility. Conditions where even skill could betray you. Preddy's squadron was ordered into Germany itself, escorting bombers, chasing what was left of the Luftwaffe into its home skies. The missions stretched longer. The odds grew thinner. On December 25th, 1944, Christmas morning, the war gave him his last flight. The Battle of the Bulge was raging across the Ardennes, and Allied air units were trying to strike back after days of bad weather. Preddy led a flight of P-51 Mustangs over Belgium. Scanning the treetops for enemy fighters reported strafing Allied troops. Through a break in the clouds, he saw one, a single FW-190, streaking low along a river road. He rolled into a dive and gave chase, the Mustang's Merlin engine roaring through the cold air. Below, the FW-190 darted between bursts of anti-aircraft fire. What he didn't know, what no one in the sky could have known, was that the gunners below were American. In the confusion of battle, with friend and foe tangled across the same horizon, the flak crews saw a fast, low-flying silhouette and opened fire. The first shell struck near his left wingtip. The second hit home. His Mustang lurched, smoke pouring from the fuselage. Witnesses saw it skip the tree line, then vanish in a brief bloom of fire. He had survived 143 combat missions, but not that one. The radio crackled with confusion, then silence. Back at Bodny, the men waited for word. It came hours later, a single line relayed through command. Captain George E. Preddy, Jr., KIA, December 25th, 1944, friendly fire. The mess hall fell silent. Someone turned off the radio. Outside, snow fell quietly across the runway. In the official report, the language was sterile. Incident due to ground fire, own forces. But for those who had flown beside him, it was more than an accident. It was proof of the randomness that haunted every man who went to war. His crew chief, a quiet mechanic named Mac Johnson, refused to wash the oil stains off Preddy's P-51. He told the press later, "The plane outlived the man. That's not how it's supposed to be." They buried him near Liège, Belgium, under a small white cross that bore his name and rank. No speeches, no flyovers, just a few men standing in the cold, saluting the sky that had both made and taken him. In the distance, the faint hum of a Mustang could still be heard. Some swore it was the sound of Preddy's Merlin engine, climbing one last time into the clouds. History remembers the names that echo. Not always the loudest, but the ones that carry weight. For George E. Preddy, Jr., his echo came not from survival, but from how he flew and what he stood for in the fleeting age of the fighter ace. When the war ended months later, his squadron, the blue-nosed bastards of Bodny, came home without their captain. They returned with stories that blurred the line between myth and memory. How he once outflew an entire Luftwaffe wing, how his bullets seemed to find metal by instinct, how he smiled before every flight as if saying goodbye in advance. His wingman said there was something uncanny about him, an awareness that the sky would take him sooner than most. Preddy didn't fight for medals, one of them said years later. He fought because that's where he belonged, up there. In the decades that followed, air shows across America kept his name alive. A restored P-51 Mustang, painted in the same deep blue nose and white tail flashes, bore the words, "Cripes a mighty third." It flew not as a weapon now, but as a ghost, its Merlin engine roaring like memory itself. Spectators would look up as it passed and whisper, "That's Preddy's plane." And for a moment, they could almost see him again, helmet tilted back, sunlight glinting off his goggles, scanning the horizon as if another dogfight might still be waiting beyond the clouds. Historians later called his 10-minute battle mathematically impossible. How could one man, in a single flight, destroy 8 aircraft without being hit once? But the answer wasn't numbers. It was something harder to measure: instinct, clarity, courage born from exhaustion. Preddy's records remain untouched. No P-51 pilot in the 8th Air Force ever surpassed his victory count. And yet, his story isn't just about kills. It's about control in chaos. In an era defined by industrial war, where death came from miles away, Preddy fought close enough to see the faces of the men he shot down. He didn't celebrate their deaths. He respected them. That's what made him different, and why, decades later, even German pilots spoke his name with respect. Time dulled the noise of the war, but not its meaning. When veterans gathered for reunions, someone always mentioned the morning over Normandy, the one where a farm boy from North Carolina turned the sky into legend. They'd raise a glass quietly, not to the kills, but to the man. To George, they'd say, to the one who never hesitated. Today, at the Preddy Memorial Foundation in Greensboro, a bronze statue of the young captain stands beside a polished granite wall. His gaze is tilted upward, toward an open sky. Behind him, the engraved words read, "He flew the way men dream of living, fast, free, and without fear." The last stand over Normandy wasn't just 10 minutes of combat. It was a moment that captured the best and worst of what war demanded of men: the speed, the grace, and the cost. And in that fleeting space between life and legend, George Preddy left behind something that few ever do. He didn't just conquer the sky, he made it remember him.